Filter.
Here we are on the internet. Mike, you look like you've cleaned up a little bit for the Saturday morning show. Normally you look like you're post shower. Are you post shower?
I did shower. Sometimes I wake up early.
Oh, really? But is there usually a pre-shower? Is there usually a pre-pod shower on the weekend?
Depends if I wake up early enough. Depends if I feel exceptionally dirty.
Depends. You have those. You have those. What's it called? Those shower eyes, a little bit like the swimmer eyes or whatever. It looks like you. Looks like you had some. You a long shower guy?
No, man. We're in a drought. Gotta move that thing along.
Oh, is California currently drought?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
You have one of those the timers when you get in the shower. You flip the timer and then you gotta
No, I don't. I have a pretty solid internal clock.
That's good.
I wonder how long I'm in the shower. I wouldn't have any. I don't know what my guess would be. How long I shower? 6 minutes? I don't know. That would be my guess. All right. We ready to go?
You're popping a little bit again. Do you want to unplug and
fucking far away? I don't know what to do, CJ. It's like we can't do it on this platform anymore. We can't.
StreamYard,
I changed fucking mics. I changed cords. It's not like the fuck StreamYard. StreamYard, fuck you. So we'll do it with the popping, and it will be the last time we use this because I'm going to throw my fucking computer out the window. There we go. Fuck StreamYard. Fuck it. Fuck it. I'm sorry if you're listening to this. You're just going to have to deal with the fucking popping. I'll talk as low as I can. I don't think it's that kind of popping, though. The Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast is presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook by using promo code RTRS and brought to you by Adam Ksebe, the official realtor of the process. Big Barker Therapeutic Dog Beds. Get yours with the Process Pup patches at bigbarker.com/Ricky. Body Bio supplements for a healthier life. Get 20% off anything with promo code RTRS20 and Kinetic Skateboarding. Free tunes for the life of your board with the purchase of any new snowboard. On the show today, Sixers blow a truly winnable game in the slowest, most painful fashion I've seen in a very long time. Credit to them. Daryl Morey does an interview and talks a lot. Did he really say anything? Doc Rivers talks down to another reporter. But first on the docket, something that is exciting for all of us here at The Ricky. We'll have Chris Herring on. Chris Herring, currently of Sports Illustrated. He wrote a new outstanding book about the 90s Knicks called Blood in the Garden, which is available everywhere now. And we will talk about the book, the 90s Knicks, and so on and so forth. Before we get going, I did mention Kinetic Skateboarding. It is, where I live right now, it is 14 degrees. Look, I know people don't love winter. I know they don't love, but I love like clothing in winter. I love the hoodie, love the heavier jean, love the winter hat, love all that stuff. Kinetic killing it all right now with all that stuff. If you need any winter gear, if you need a snowboard, any of that stuff, kineticskateboarding.com. Use promo code Dave Silver for 9.1% off your first order. Without any further ado, Amos and the Chef.
We were right, y'all. We were right. Even when it went wrong, we were right. We was right, y'all. We were right. So say the name. Say the name. We were right, y'all. We were right. Even when it went wrong, we were right. We were right, y'all. We were right. So say the name. Say the name. Say the name.
Welcome to the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast. I'm Spike Eskin, along with a guy who always knows how to beat a zone defense. That is one Mike Levin. Good morning, sir.
The Sixers. Who would have thought? Once again,
that they would Sixers us. Not a bad idea to start with it.
Be themselves.
Yep. Not a bad idea, I think, today to start the pod with a different team on a different era to maybe ease into Sixers so we don't have to blast people with that game again that happened last night. I would
Absolutely.
love to forget about that one, you know?
You know, it's a long season. Gotta mix it up a little bit. We're in the doldrums. They've won some good games. They've lost
Yep.
some very winnable games. Just at a place where, you know, we know who they are at this point. We've seen the heights they can reach because of Joel. And we're all waiting for the trade deadline in less than 3 weeks. And it's just like, we'll see what happens.
Cool. We will get to Chris
End of
in a moment.
podcast. End of
Yeah.
Sixers podcast. Beginning of Knicks podcast.
Yeah, yeah, fine. Well, luckily it's not current Knicks, by the way, because if being up here in the New York area, I don't know if there's a more pissed off NBA fan base right now than the Knicks fan base. Like
it's just very predictable that they were going to take a step back. It was just incredibly predictable that they overachieved last year in a pretty weak East outside of the top few, a down year for a lot of teams, including like the Raptors and plenty of other teams on the way up. And they got like career years and career shooting years out of so many guys. And like Thibodeau is a Doug Collins type who like wears out his welcome quick. And this is how it happens.
The most similar fan base to the Eagles I've ever seen, I think, in my life are Knicks fans. Like being embedded in the middle of them, it is very, very similar. However, without any further ado, CJ, if we're ready, we can. Oh, there he is, Mr. Chris Herring. How are you?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Good. Big week for you, buddy. Look at this thing right here. Big week. How's it going?
You know, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I keep using the phrase emotionally overwhelming, but in the very best way. Not a complaint, not a critique at all. Just you know, this is the first time I've ever written a book, and I think there's something to be said for getting so much support and seeing people post their copies of the book and you know, post their pre-orders and everything, and seeing all of it at the same time, and seeing what legitimately feels like, and it might be, you know, thousands of people all doing that within the same 2, 3, 4 day span is just such a blessing and just so overwhelming. But it's beautiful, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at times just because I didn't expect it. Yeah. But also you're kind of like, how could I be so fortunate to have this sort of support from people that have never met me in a lot of cases?
Well, it's very cool. I mean, first of all, the title's great. It's a great title, and it goes to show like how much a title does for really everything. Like, you know, we're writers. You do everything you can, and if it's like a middling title, you're like, no one's reading that. No one's watching that show. It's like no one's seeing that movie. You got to get a good title, and the cover and like the art and everything is really just, it pops, and it already feels so good. And I think also there's been you know, after The Last Dance, there was a real like vacuum, I think, of everyone trying to be like, whoa, that was such a big hit, and like we need to find the next thing of that. And it felt like there were a lot of like quick wrong answers to that, of people trying
Tom Brady shows on ESPN and whatnot.
Yeah, like hustling it through, trying to get it. But this is, even though, and maybe there's the 90s feel like the right time, but this feels like, for me, reading it, like the right, not sequel, but next position for like, to satiate my like Last Dance feelings of what I missed. And you're reading it, and there's a bunch of times when I read the book, and I'm still into it. This is how far I'm into it. I'm just past the pictures. It's so good. I was like, I'm going to just like dance around a little bit from chapter to chapter. But the way that you craft the narrative, it's like there's no chapter that you're like, I'll skip this one. So I've read every page, every word.
Thank you.
And it's great. And I look forward to finishing it.
Thank you.
But it just feels like it's the right level of, because so many books are about, I'm just talking, so many books are about like teams that won.
Welcome,
and I
Chris.
think there's
Welcome
something so
podcast.
nice about like, you know, the 90s and 2000 Suns are a similar thing, where like teams that didn't win are inherently more interesting to me. Did you think about that when you wrote this book?
Absolutely. And I keep kind of making that argument on, you know, a number of the pods I've done and stuff like that, that really, this is, you know, the Bulls had struggles certainly during those years. I mean, we got to see 10 parts of it. but on some level, when you don't win, and the heartbreak that a city feels and suffers because of that, and the players that feel this agony of not having gotten there, I think by nature it's more interesting, because or even if they suffer all that and then they do finally win, that's more interesting. It's hell, even Jordan's story, they started, the documentary, and you start his story with the idea of him losing to the Pistons. If someone just kind of wins everything all the time, it's not to say it's not interesting, but I mean, it's probably more interesting to see some aspects of that from the other side, to watch how someone's tortured somebody else. So it's absolutely, there's that part of it. But I also think even without that, winning, losing aside, I would argue, and not really flinch while saying it, that the Knicks dictated more about the way the game was going to change during that era than any other team by far. When you just look at the rules and the fact that the league became so much more skill based, the league wanted nothing to do with the way the Knicks were playing defense or basketball, for that matter. The slow pace of the game. I found all these statistics. I didn't use them, but all these statistics about how much longer the Knicks games were on average, like 15, 20 minutes longer than any other team in the league that year, or during those years, just because of the fact that they were fouling so much. Because of the fact that their pace was so slow, because of the fact that there was no scoring. The league didn't want that, and they essentially ran as far away from it as they could, which probably undercut the Knicks a little bit in terms of how competitive they could be after a while. But to me, that's really interesting, because it's not only a team that came really close to winning the whole damn thing, they came really close to knocking off Michael Jordan, but also, even when they didn't do those things, fundamentally changed the way the league looks. And the way I keep describing them now is that people that are just now really watching basketball for the first time, the Knicks are like the sort of team that you would see in the museum, because you're never going to see them again. You're never going to see a team like that again, because the league won't let you. And like, it's not a criticism. It's because I think even Doc Rivers and a lot of the people I talked to that were parts of those Knicks teams, they've said like the game badly needed to evolve, and it did. But, that's part of why I think this was just kind of such a rich era and a rich team to really go in and look at and analyze, because they did fundamentally change the league in a way that people wouldn't recognize those teams now. And people from that era, if they fell into a 25 or 30-year coma, would not recognize basketball now.
It's one of the things about this book that I think lends itself better to a book than it does a video documentary. Because I think if people actually watched full games of these teams, which I watched a lot of, it's like the dramatic parts are dramatic, but most of the game was pretty terrible. I mean, it was like pretty fucking terrible to watch. In the comparison between them and a team that actually won, there's actually a Philadelphia team that I think, the 93 Phillies, was this team that if they had won, I think would be looked upon as like cheaters, because they were all on steroids, they were all bad guys. But because they didn't win, they're kind of lovable. And I think the comparison between these Knicks teams and even the Bad Boy Pistons, like there's nothing heartwarming about the Bad Boy Pistons. It was cool, but I think you paint these Knicks teams in a tough but also sort of lovable way somehow,
Yeah, no, I think there's some truth to that, and it's funny because I didn't really aim to do that. A lot of people are like, so, you're from Chicago, so you have to have hated those teams. I'm like, no, I was 4 when they hired Pat Riley, and by the time I was 8 or 9, I don't think the Knicks have ever played the Bulls in a playoff series since then, and I wasn't of an age to have remembered or seen any of their playoff series against it. I didn't care about the Knicks. I probably didn't know the Knicks existed until I was like 10. And even with the Bulls, I wasn't of a fandom to even really realize what they were doing until maybe they won their 5th title. So it's really not such a passionate era for me. Like, I didn't know anything about the era when I really started researching this. So I'm not a fan of the Knicks or the Bulls really from that era or anything. I went in knowing that their characters were interesting. You've got essentially a Kurt Warner type, and John Starks, who played at 4 different colleges and bagged groceries at Safeway. You've got Anthony Mason, who, when you compare him and kind of even combine him with John Starks, I think they played altogether 3 years of high school basketball combined between the two of them. and Mason was not a guy that stuck in the NBA at first either. You had Charles Oakley, who was a guy that, obviously we know his story enough in the NBA, but was a guy that was so not physical in basketball when he started his high school career that his high school basketball coach made him play high school football to try to make him more physical and to try to get him to hit people and actually kind of enjoy the physicality a little bit. The only blue chipper you really had on this team was Ewing, and I think because he was the only guy that was really good and really dominant, it gave more room to kind of fill in the gaps and the holes about how colorful and interesting this team was, because by definition, they had to kind of scrap to get where they were. And they had to kind of essentially take certain things about the game and try to overemphasize them to really get where they got, as far as the way they played defense, as far as the way that they just knocked the crap out of people, as far as the messaging they took from Riley. But also, their backstories were really interesting to me. So many of them had the same story where they just kind of grew up being really, really anti and wanting to just kind of hit people and wanting to, headbutt people. And, from Doc Rivers to Xavier McDaniel to Greg Anthony to John Starks to Oakley to Mason, all of them were basically like that, with the exception of really Patrick and Charles Smith. And, I think you can get away with being that way when you're Patrick, but Charles Smith did not seem to be afforded the same sort of reprieve, I'll put it that way, from Pat Riley and other members of the team.
Yeah, there's a lot of great details in this book that will make you kind of just like put it down for a second and take a walk and think about life. I don't want to spoil all of them, but I'm gonna name a couple, and I want to hear what your favorite detail is. Just like the line, like Oakley popping Derek Coleman, former Sixer, twice over, former Sixer, in the mouth in a playoff game so that he's bleeding and he has to come out of the game. And the doctor for the Nets was sitting in the upper deck at Madison Square Garden, so he couldn't get down there in time. So I think you said 6 minutes of game time, Derek Coleman is just bleeding on the sideline, unable to come back in the game because the doctor is like having to like fight his way through a playoff MSG crowd. I loved that detail, and they won that game because Derek was out of the game, which I thought was crazy. And I also, that's one of my favorite ones. And then the off the court stuff, there's so many good ones, but what you really seem to like relish is practices in South Carolina in training camp, when it's just like everybody beating the fucking shit out of each other. And lines like Charles never really respected me until I hit him. And the like Charles Oakley saving a ball out of bounds into an assistant coach's nuts, which helped him find a growth and possibly saved his life. There's just so many like those kinds of details. I want to know what your favorite detail in the book was, because those were some of mine.
Well, I'm trying not to spoil it for you, because you said you're what you showed me, I think you're about halfway through it. But based on what you just said about the detail,
I'm just past the pictures. I just passed the pictures.
Right. So based on what you said about the doctor in the third deck, there's a detail that I really like on Mason that this was like the right as we were getting into like the the pager era and the two-way pagers and everything. Well, I guess that was probably a little bit later, but he bought two-way pagers for like his whole crew that he wanted to go out with at night, all the guys. And a lot of them were single. And I guess Mason to some extent was not, but it was Anthony Mason. So what did you expect? So he gets all his like 15 or 20 of his guy friends pagers so they can communicate and set up plans from one night to the next. He then gives them pagers. They basically have competitions to see who can get the most numbers during a night out. But because he bought the pagers and because he had the PIN codes for them, he had back-end access to the pagers. He could go in and he could change people's voicemail greetings to make them essentially sound effeminate or gay when women tried to call them. But also he could change, he could also steal the numbers that his friends got from women so that he could just keep them for himself. And also in that chapter, I mentioned that he had like essentially an accordion style piece of paper that just had like hundreds of women's names and numbers on it, which is just completely Anthony Mason. He was a fun guy.
I did get to that chapter, and it's very right. it's a very 90s thing to do. Both like the like glamorizing, womanizing, and also having a having a pager and having back end access. It just feels like such a perfectly of a time moment for that to happen. I also did love Anthony Mason, Complicated Guy. The statutory rape case is very upsetting to read.
Super complicated, and it was, to me, his chapter was really important just because one, I think there's naturally more curiosity about him from the Knicks fan base, at least since he passed away several years ago. I think he was probably the most interesting player from that era as far as his backstory, complicated. But because he's not here and because he couldn't defend himself, I wanted to make sure I spent a lot of time on his story to make sure that I wasn't rushing anything towards the end of the deadline I had. And also that I didn't want to just rely on what his teammates had to say about him because, they've been asked about him a lot. They probably give kind of sanitized responses a little bit. And also they might be talking about him strictly on the court when I want to know about his life. So I spent a lot of time talking to his family, a lot of time talking to like college teammates, people from the neighborhood that he grew up in, because I wanted to get a full context of who he was and not a sanitized version. But I also, and I was honest with them. I said, look, I'm not certainly not promising that I'm going to write about only the good stuff because like he had a lot to him. You don't need me to tell you that because you knew him personally. But two, like you saw what was written about him when he was living. And so I don't even think he shied away from that. So I'm not going to shy away from it. And, fortunately for me, just about everybody was willing to open up. The women that he'd been with, one of his children, childhood friends, other players, college roommates, people that ran the college program that basically, fought to get him reinstated when the school was essentially ready to kick him out or did kick him out.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to talk to everybody that knew the ins, the outs, the goods, the bads, and hopefully it came out layered. The people that I had read the chapter first were like, I don't know whether to really, really love the guy or kind of not like him or hate him. And that was kind of the response I wanted because, again, I'm not a fan, but also for someone that has stuff in their track record that's kind of troubling, you don't necessarily want to just make them completely lovable when there's stuff in there that's sketchy.
I think Mason, from a basketball standpoint, is an interesting comparison to like Xavier McDaniel, who you open up the book talking about. And I think one of the most like wake up, this is a different era moments is when you refer to Xavier McDaniel as like a small forward. And you're like, oh my God, like today he would be a center. Like he would definitely be a center. But you think about Mason, and Mason is like this combination of like Draymond Green and Simmons, and like what a cool player he would be in this era. And just looking at the players that would exist in a really positive way now and the ones that wouldn't, Mason, I think, would be so interesting today.
Yeah, there's, it's funny. I thought about this question, Spike. Somebody asked me, like, how would those teams do now? And I don't know how the team would do. But when you look at, I would say, like, their top 6 or 7 guys, and I don't think I'm biased on this. Like I said, I don't particularly care for the Knicks or, it's not them. I'm not a fan really of any team at this point. But, like, I was like, okay, my general thought is, like, superstars would work in most eras, at least from the 90s on, I think. I don't think, if you're talking about the 40s, okay, maybe they wouldn't fit well in 2022. But I think the 90s, someone like Patrick Ewing was such a dominant player. Offensively, he would probably be better defensively than a lot of people give him credit for. People thought he was going to be the next Bill Russell when he came out of college. He wasn't quite that good defensively, but he was still good. So Ewing, obviously. But then you look at their other guys, and like Starks was a guy that led the league in threes one year, was ahead of his time in that regard in terms of shooting those. He slashed to the basket. He was participating in a dunk contest. He played bigger than his size defensively. He was 6'2". They listed him at 6'5". I think he actually would do pretty well in today's game. He could have been a better passer, but I think he would fare pretty well in today's game. Oakley is a guy that, was not athletic at all, could not jump over a phone book, but had a 17-foot jumper, was really, really good instinctually as far as his defense, and was a pretty good passer. Like, I wonder a little bit like whether his athleticism hinders him a little bit in the pro level. He wasn't that big or that tall. He obviously couldn't thrive on all the flagrants that he gave out in today's game. But like, I think you could do a lot worse than him at the NBA level right now if he still has those same attributes. Mason certainly would fit. Now, he was not a guy that could shoot, but you mentioned Simmons. You mentioned Draymond. If you have enough of the other skills, you can make that work. I mean, he's very versatile defensively, a very good passer, a very good ball handler for someone his size. You weren't going to stand in his way because the dude, I mean, and I don't know, Michael, if you've gotten to this point in the book with him, maybe not, based on what you were saying. It was essentially, Don Nelson essentially accused him of being on steroids, when it came time to trade. Him. So I'm not sure, I never got to the bottom of the answer, but like he was built and you weren't going to get in that dude's way. You weren't going to challenge him to a fight generally. So there's Mace. Charles Smith is really one interesting one too, because to me, he might have been the guy that like would have fit best in this era aside from Mason, just a 6'10", 6'11" dude that could step out and shoot, that was, a 4 or a 5. The Knicks were playing him at the 3, which I think was a mistake. And was like, a finesse player on a team full of like rough and tumble guys, but they wanted him to be rough and tumble right with them. And it's like, no, let the guy be who he is. He averaged 20 a game before he got to you guys. And then you guys, it felt like they kind of ruined him. Yeah. Riley, certainly. And I certainly make that argument in the book that like Riley essentially psychologically just wore the guy down. And from the first day of practice felt like he wasn't a fit, and more or less let him and the other people in the organization know that. So I feel like you have at least 5 or 6 guys that would have fit pretty well. They had Hubert Davis, who was a great 3-point shooter. Doesn't mean he would have been, a great player in this era, but, maybe he has more value in this era than he did back then. So they had at least 6, 7 guys that Derek Harper too. Like, I mean, there's a lot of guys that could have played, but I don't know that they would have been a great team because of that. But I don't think they translate as poorly on an individual scale as a lot of people would think.
Well, by the way, Ewing has 3-point. Like if Ewing was playing today, he'd be shooting 4 or 5 threes a game.
Absolutely.
Like that was the one thing that I always compare to Embiid, and Embiid has now progressed past that. But when he's facing up and shooting that 17-footer, like he looks like Ewing to me. He looks like Ewing to me when he shoots free throws. So I think Ewing from a shooting standpoint would be unbelievable right now.
Absolutely. He might have been the best 7-foot jump shooter back then. I think you probably had a couple that might have been as good, if not better than him. But I mean, he was shooting 19-foot jumpers anyway. Back then when the line was at 21 feet, there just wasn't the emphasis on take 2 steps further back and get 3 points for it instead of 2. But if that's an emphasis in that game and at that time, Ewing is ahead of his time in that regard. He was ahead of his time as a jump shooter for sure.
Yeah, for sure. One last Anthony Mason quote, and I want to get to Riley in a second, but there's a quote of him in Istanbul where you quote him saying, "I had to frown at some of the squirrely things those Turks were slurping up," and that was just a great line to read.
He was not the most PC person.
No, for sure, but it's just a random. He's in Istanbul. He's like, I don't know what was going on. It's very funny. Riley. To me, Riley at this point has been sort of lurking in the shadows at Miami for so long, and you really get into, I haven't thought about the eras of Pat Riley from like being there for the Showtime Lakers and like feeling like he was almost disregarded a little bit in there because that was such the magic show, and then coming to New York and making it like this is the team that he wants to coach. He's doing it. This is in his image, and I thought you really got into, for a guy that at this point isn't very public, is very reserved. I think you got into his head better than I've ever read anyone getting in his head, and it felt to me that all of this is like, in the whole Heat culture stuff is like all very curated, not an accident, not like, oh, I just whatever, and the media just wants to go. It seems like he intentionally, at this point in his career, wants to be exactly in the position he is and wants people to think exactly what they think about him. Did you feel that way?
No. You I think you're spot on. What was interesting is that sometimes I would like Google search certain things to try to, the one thing you don't want to do in a book is it's okay if you have to use stuff that's been out there before, but you don't want to necessarily present it like you're the first one to come up with it. And then when you do have stuff that's kind of exclusive or brand new to the conversation, you do want to try to find some ways to kind of suggest that like this hasn't been out there before. So when I was Google searching some of the stuff that was going to be in the book, I would look up, like, for instance, the I have an anecdote in there about Riley dunking himself into basically a Gatorade cooler that's full of ice and water before a game, and he just holds his breath under there for 2.5, 3 minutes for pregame. And I write that out, and I look at him like, man, this is a great story. Then I look around, and then I find that, like, he's done the same shit with the Miami Heat. So it's like he, in some ways, like, he was doing some of the same things. Like, he took the Knicks to a casino at one point in Reno, Nevada, during a losing streak to try to get the Knicks out of a rut. And then they went on a 15-game winning streak. I'm pretty sure that, when I talked to some of the Heat players for this book, that they're like, oh, he did that with us too. Or like, oh, he took us to a movie too. And it's like he's doing the same things, but on some level, like, he built the team in Miami the exact same way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that their cultures were the same. It makes sense that they hated each other because he literally, like, cloned the Knicks just, further south in nicer weather. So it was absolutely, like, the Heat culture stuff was a Knicks culture before then. And, and even when Van Gundy took over, I think that's why the teams hated each other so much, because Van Gundy was a Riley disciple and, had adopted maybe not everything, but very similar to what Riley had done. I mean, hell, Jeff Van Gundy named his daughter's middle name is Riley, and it's not by mistake. I mean, he did it to essentially honor someone that meant a lot to him at one point. So that's not by mistake. And I know it sounds corny and cliche when people talk about Heat culture. There is a culture to that organization, and a lot of the stuff that he did in the 90s, as far as body fat and percentage and stuff like that, he still measures that stuff, and he still goes off of that stuff within the organization now, the way he did it back then.
But it's such a level of, like, paranoia also with who he is, and, like, testing people, and, like, how he treated the GM of the Knicks, Dave Checketts, and, like, other people. The anecdote about him weighing in on Checketts' wife's, the color of her car, because it couldn't be green for the Celtics or red for the Bulls, like, is really a window in. And she feels like everything, he's, like, hung up on that $10,000 that, like, they owed him because of the Reno trip. And it's just like, it seems like he's always testing people. And he obviously won in LA, and he's obviously won in Miami, but New York is really where he was the most himself and had the team that he would have been the most proud of for winning. And he didn't win. Like, they never won. And so you hear about all these things, like with Michael in Last Dance, like, you hear about, like, well, he was an asshole to his teammates. Well, he did this, but, like, he won, so he was right. And Riley, at this moment, for these 4 years, right? For these 4 years in New York, he was a huge asshole to everyone all the time. Almost all the time. Was like, broke Charles Smith, was, like, really mean to all these guys. Like really, you don't hear about the coach being such a character in today's NBA anymore, because they're just like, I'm having to just, like, manage these personalities. Riley was as much of a personality as anyone. And he was, like, instilling all of this, like, yeah, obviously violence, toughness, whatever, but, like, just, like, headbutting each other and wanting part of being an asshole to be the part of the team. And they never won. And so, like, looking back at it and going, well, he had to do it because he won. They didn't win. So, like, was it all worth it? Like, you look back and you're just like, no, you were kind of just an asshole, and maybe they would have had a better time if they weren't so tired all the time from you being an asshole.
I mean, I'll say this to you. People warned me very early in this project. They're like, Riley's never going to talk to you for this. And I tried my best to fight against that and to try to, change the reality. I talked to people that were basically the most recent to get Riley to really sit down and open up. Wright Thompson is probably the last person to really write on Riley at length. I think he did a big profile on him for ESPN the magazine in 2017, and he gave me some tips, and I tapped into those. I went to Riley's hometown for, where he grew up in Schenectady, upstate New York, for 3.5-4 days in the dead of winter. It was a massive snowstorm while I was there. So met with his childhood buddies, spoke with them at length about what it was like for Riley growing up, went to Riley's, childhood home, did a lot of things just to try to understand who he was, how he was the way he was. But the thing that people kept coming back to before I made my overture to try to talk to Pat was that you do realize New York is the one place he never won, right? Basically that he had all the success with the Lakers. He won a title there as a player. He won 4 championships as a coach. He obviously went to Miami, won 1 as a coach, won 2 as an exec, could have his own Hall of Fame career if you were only counting the Miami stuff, quite frankly. New York, he didn't win, and he got very close. But he also left in a fashion that was so controversial that why would he want to relitigate that in the form of a book? So people kept telling me that almost no matter what you do, he doesn't want to go there. He doesn't go there. But yeah, my question lately, man, has been, I didn't really think this way when I was writing the book or even finishing it, but afterwards, and I guess now really, as I've done more of these interviews, I'm of the opinion that I don't think Riley could have lasted much longer in New York anyway. Granted, he left the way he left. People are still pissed off about it in New York. I had an excerpt around the New York Times, and people were like, "Oh, I'm still so mad at this dude about the way he left for Miami," which obviously was underhanded. He kind of went around the Knicks' back to do it while he was under contract to make agreements with Miami, who was offering an ownership stake. But with a lot of the stuff you're saying, the crazy messaging that he used on this team to show them, Bighorn Rams headbutting each other and violent car crashes on video before they go play a game, between the idea of getting so worked up about, your boss's wife's car and what color it will be, and whether it's the color that the Celtics wear or the Bulls wear, the idea of telling the team that the team psychologist can't work with players anymore because you don't want the psychologist to actually talk to your players or have any relationship with your players, getting worked up about players reading the Bible or going to chapel. Can you imagine being that keyed into every damn thing your players do and every damn thing your boss does and every damn thing that your boss's wife does? It takes a toll. And to your point of the idea of well, if they win, you can have a different conversation about that because it's worth it. They won a lot. They just didn't win the whole thing. And my thing is what I keep thinking about is if he hadn't gotten ownership or wasn't going to get ownership in New York, it wouldn't have worked much longer. I think the flip side of that is if they'd won in 94, I think a lot of that stuff changes because I think it's just the cost of winning, that you can tolerate it more when you win the whole thing.
For sure.
But I don't think he could have lasted much longer in New York with how hard charging he was and how on it and just how into everything he was, even if it really fundamentally shouldn't have mattered. And I don't think anybody can exist thinking that way. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Well, I think to his credit, to exist in the Jordan era and try to beat Jordan, you have to do something. You can't out him, right? I mean, his other tact of well, you know what? I'm going to turn the team into maniacs and we're going to beat the fuck out of everybody. And maybe one year, it actually reminds me of Morey. Morey, he's when the Warriors were doing what they were doing and his just sort of go for it thing. I do appreciate that, they didn't try to out Jordan, didn't try to have a better team than him, in a skill fashion, but let me do this, and the only way that this is going to work is if I go all the way like a lunatic. I do appreciate it, and you could argue they came as close, if not closer, than anybody else during that era of beating them. Beating them in obviously it wouldn't have been in the finals, but getting past those teams.
Sure. No, I think you're right. I mean, look, you needed something, and that was what the league was afraid of, right? Is that the idea the Knicks knew they didn't have the talent to do it. Riley came in literally on day one and said, look, we're going to dust off the strategy the Pistons have used. The Pistons had the talent to do it before, had a lot of, not a lot, but they had some offense to get it done too. Joe Dumars was a great player. You had the microwave. You had a lot of talent on that team, and you had a lot of guys that could just bruise the shit out of Michael. So they used all that stuff. They beat him a couple times. Pat's idea was basically he aged out. The team aged out. And so they're not going to be able to carry this out anymore. They're too old to get it done. We're younger than they are. We don't have a bunch of offensive talent on this team. We have guys that can bruise him defensively. We can do that. We can get in his head psychologically, which I get into that a little bit, I think, in maybe the 4th chapter of the book. So, they did what they could, but they were trying to basically level the playing field, which was unlevel and uneven because of Michael. They tried to level it by basically saying, we'll make it a more physical game than what they're comfortable with. the league saw it, and the league, that was what I was saying, is that you wouldn't see a team like that today, because basically the league said, we don't want physicality to be something that levels the playing field when you don't have enough skill or talent or athleticism. And so they took that away from the Knicks and other teams that were trying to copycat what the Knicks were doing. The Pacers are a good example. The Heat obviously would be a good example. But Pat's messaging was part of what gave the Knicks that edge to play over the edge, quite frankly. And the league wanted nothing to do with that. So it was one of the ways they could stay competitive. But I do think even that would have been taken away from them if Pat had stayed longer, like it was with Van Gundy.
I have so many other like little details in the book that I want to talk to you about, but we have you for a limited time, and I want to get to the thing that I've been thinking about since you announced the book, really, because the 90s Knicks and to some extent the Pistons before that, as well as the Pacers you mentioned, were like those kinds of prototypes for 80s 90s physicality that people look back, even though the NBA tried to legislate it out, right? And you have a chapter in the book about David Stern coming in and saying, like, we don't do this anymore, basically, in the middle of this run. And people look back on that very fondly. People look back on that and they laugh and say, like we glorify that kind of violence and physicality. But in the NBA now, even though it's legislated out and people agree that the game is prettier and more fun to watch and more open and all that stuff, it feels like everyone collectively, including the broadcasters, including Jeff Van Gundy, who is like instrumental in this. Anytime there's like really physical play or a fight on the court, even just like pushing and shoving, pearls get clutched in a way that contradicts with how they love violence from the past. And to me, maybe it's you feel like there's danger in the moment as you're watching it and you're like, it could escalate. Whereas the past, it's like the book is already closed. Like we know what happened. But I find that very strange that like basketball is a physical game. We want these guys to give a shit, but we don't want them to care so much. Like there was a foul. Did you see the Grayson Allen foul last night?
I did on Caruso. Yeah.
Yeah. On Caruso and Van Gundy's on the call and like hard foul for sure. But he's got an open lane to the basket. He fouled him hard. He reached back and like kind of grabbed him a little bit to make sure he didn't foul. But that happened 1,000 times in this era. And like you want guys to give a shit. If he slapped him on the arm and get just like a little bit of an and one and he finished the dunk, it'd be like horrible play. And what I find when I watch the NBA today and we talk about like, the system of flagrant fouls and stuff and what they want in the game and what they don't want in the game, it's very frustrating to me that there's just, you want guys to care so much, but also after the fact that when they do care, there's these just punitive punishments as if that's going to make a difference. And I just wonder if you thought about that during in the writing of this book, being like so much of that now is frowned upon and like a scourge on what the NBA is, when it's just like, but we love it in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I mean, I guess I would challenge you on this. I think there's a ton of stuff that we love that we also can realize is dangerous. And granted, like that was a hard foul. Could it have turned out really badly? It could have. And I guess that's the fear, is that we know there's a chance that it could have turned bad. Hell, I love watching boxing, but I also realize there's a real danger to it. And we've also heard about people like having all sorts of horrible injuries with it. So I think that's what we know now. I think from the league's perspective, they don't want anything. I mean, like, for instance, as we talk about the film option rights or the book option rights for my book to maybe someday become a documentary or something like that, it's really interesting because some of the places that are interested or have already made offers for something like that, part of what they were bringing up was the idea that in order to really make your documentary or a documentary of your book as great as it could possibly be, we have to have the footage. And I'm like, okay, that's no problem, right? And they're like, well, the league has to sign off on it. And I was like, okay, that's no problem, right? They're like, well, that Malice at the Palace documentary that came out this past year, the league didn't sign off on that. The reason the league didn't sign off on that is that they're very wary of the idea of anything impacting the fans or anything spilling into the stands. So there's always a fear of that, even if it's just a small thing, because who knows, if someone throws a punch and everyone comes off the bench, that could very easily spill into the stands. And so I think that's the thought, is like the league. I understand that. It is interesting that I do kind of feel like there's such a narrow window for guys to react to something without it being seen as too much.
Yeah.
And I'm always, the thing that I'm really curious about is, like, you remember when the pandemic, it didn't end, but when they started putting games back in the arenas, or the fans back in the arenas right before the playoffs or right during the playoffs, and all within the same week, you had like someone dump something on Russell Westbrook, somebody
In
throw
Philly,
something
yeah.
at Kyrie
Popcorn.
Irving, Trae Young got spit on. It, for a quick minute there, and granted, it hasn't been this bad, this season. For a minute there, it started to feel like, man, it doesn't feel like we're that far away from something else like really bubbling over and spilling into the stands. So I think that's part of the fear too, at least from the league standpoint, is like they can't have that. That's their vantage point on it, is that like they're very image conscious still. I think they were more image conscious back when David Stern was there, the dress code, everything else. But I do feel like that's part of keeping it so narrowly defined, is that one, these guys make a lot more money now than they did before. But two, you don't want anything to potentially hurt the fans or freak out the fans that pay all this money to support the league.
No, that's fair. And I guess there's a distinction between like fighting on the court, which a lot of guys did. And obviously there's the Heat Knicks fight and, Van Gundy grabbing at Morning's legs, which is hilarious. I watched the other day. And just like physicality on the court, where it's like, they go to the replay review and like look at it for sure, and they slow it down to like 1/16 of a frame, and they're like, that's intent right there, that's intent, and he should be tossed in the game. And it's like,
I'll give you that.
You're playing hard. I don't know. I play hard on the court, and I think sometimes it just like happens, and it just like
I'm with you on that 100%.
Yeah,
I'm
all
with
right.
you
That's a pet issue for me as a guy that like goes for it.
I hear you. I'm with you, because it is a little bit annoying to see some of that. Yeah.
All right, I have two somewhat related historical basketball questions about this team. The first one is Ewing is in a group of guys from this era that did not do it during the Jordan era. There's Barkley and Malone and yada, yada, yada. I guess if I were to ask you gut check question, was Patrick Ewing the guy or wasn't he the guy? What is your reaction to that? Because I would ask you the same thing about Barkley or Malone, or like, did he have it or did he not have it?
In terms of just like, did he have enough to win? Like, was he good enough to win a title?
Like, was he the best player on a championship team? Like in a different world, do you think he was?
It's actually a really good question, because I mean, my hunch is to say yes, that they were within one game of a Hakeem Olajuwon fingertip block away from winning. But the irony is that he was not very good in that series, and I think it was somewhat situational. Hakeem Olajuwon ate his lunch in that series, and it was part of why Starks, when you look at the 2 for 18 game, Starks shot so poorly, is that he felt like he had to be the number one option, because Patrick just got kind of eaten alive in that series and shot. He probably shot less than, I would say way less than 35% in that series. So from that standpoint, yes, I think he was good enough. I think there's a world in which it could have happened. I do think that the 2 finals they played in, that one against the Rockets and then the one that he couldn't play in against the Spurs, he would have been the lesser of the 2 centers, in each series. And then obviously Tim Duncan was in that other series as well with David Robinson. So he was good enough, but he never got the matchups in which he would have been the best player in the series, or where he would have been the Knicks' best player in that series. So I think yes, but situationally in the couple of series they had, no. It's actually a really good question. I wouldn't have expected to be that nuanced about it.
It's funny, like as a Starks guy, and I didn't dislike Ewing, but I was definitely a Starks guy, and everybody blames him for that game. And I was just like, well, if there was somebody else, he wouldn't have taken all those fucking, like, somebody had to do it, Yeah. And here's this guy that was elevated to a spot where he shouldn't have been elevated to. I don't know that was his fault, right? So then my second question is, if Latrell Sprewell is on the 94 Knicks instead of the 98 Knicks, do they win a title?
Yeah, I even think if they had Allen Houston, that they do. Just somebody that was more consistent offensively, that it wasn't such a struggle for. Like, think about for Starks, like obviously he carried them for most of that series. The guy was 6'2", it's asking a lot of it. It was 6'2" guy that can slash but isn't a great passer. I go through that in the book. He's really not a great passer. He's not comfortable having to run the offense, but you were relying on him. I think he averaged like 21 and 7 assists, 50% shooting, 45% from 3 from games 2 to 6. And Ewing was shooting, he shot less than 40%, I think, 3 games in a row, if I remember correctly. And that series just was like not himself, could not score on Olajuwon. So yeah, I think they absolutely win if they have a more consistent wing option. Doc Rivers kicks himself for that very reason, because he basically says, I was healthy enough to play, but they had to submit the postseason roster before the postseason started.
Yeah, I bet, Doc. For sure. It was you. It was going to be you, Doc. For sure. 34-year-old busted ass off an ACL, Doc Rivers would have done it.
It's not to say he wasn't saying that he would have like come through. What he was saying is like I could have given Pat another option, and I do think that's relevant because like I had an excerpt that basically reads that Rolando Blackman, which another guy that was really old, who a lot of people are like, what difference would he have made? Rolando had, if you look at his splits, he had the best numbers of his career against the Rockets. Mm-hmm. In the book itself, I quote Scott Brooks, who played as a backup on those Rockets teams, and he was like, we feared Rolando Blackman because he ate us alive every time we played against him, and he knew us from being in our division for so many years. This was the leading scorer in Mavs franchise history up until Dirk surpassed him. He's still second in Mavs history in scoring. But it's not that Rolando had to like play that whole fourth quarter, or that Doc would have had to play the whole fourth quarter. It was just giving Starks maybe a 2 or 3 minute breather to say, like, calm the fuck down. Like, he was just so in his head at that point. And the idea that you wouldn't pull him even for just a minute to catch his breath or just to kind of get him to refocus. I don't know that it makes the difference. It may not, but, it's one of those what ifs for sure.
Yeah. Just a team of people who consistently double down and double down and double down and double down. Yeah. We got to let you go, but I do want to say congratulations on Spike Lee, not only reading the book, but then interviewing you about it, which is dope.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
And there's a great, and I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a great Spike Lee draft lottery story in your book, the year they got Ewing. And it's so perfect and devastating and something I relate to. Obviously, we're draft lottery guys. So I'll leave that as a tease, but I encourage everyone to get the book. Blood in the Garden is really good, man. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for having me and for reading through it. I really appreciate you. You guys take care and good luck with everything.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Another endorsement for the book. Just an amazing book, and it hits you right away. Like your first 5 pages in the book, you're like, I'm fucking in. One of the things that was crazy for me is just thinking about Pat Riley being 35 when he was the host of the Showtime Lakers. As like a 45-year-old person, I'm like, wait, what the fuck? He seems so much older and crazier than I don't. What a fucking great.
There's also a lot of like really funny, penis-based lines.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Charles Oakley thing, which I mentioned, he hit an assistant in the nuts. Xavier McDaniel walking around with a hard dick all the time.
With a towel on it.
With a towel on it. Very strange thing to do around a bunch of other people at work. John Starks had a line about Reggie Miller saying, "I'm going to cut his dick off and make him eat it."
Yeah.
To the press. I think it's all great. The John Starks wedding day story, which I won't spoil, is also really, really good. There's just a lot of particular things we should talk about. We should transition this into Doc, because Doc Rivers is a pretty big part of the book, and it seems like Chris talked to him quite a bit. And I wonder if I know that his time with Riley, under Riley, has like molded him into the kind of coach he is. Yeah, and the doubling down of that.
Let's talk about that in a second. Big Barker. I would say that any of the Knick players who went through those practices would have, I think, had an advantage sleeping on a Big Barker dog bed.
Oh, their joints definitely needed it.
Come on, 2 hours.
If you're a 90s Knick, you need a Big Barker dog bed.
Yes. So as well as the 90s Knicks needing Big Barker dog beds, you see the way former NBA players walk around. They should have had better mattresses. Also bigger chairs, but better mattresses. Man, I think back to that team, think about Patrick Ewing on the little fucking folding chairs with his knees up to his eyes. Anyway, Big Barker is the only real dog bed on the market. We support it because it is healthier for your dog. Straight up, No questions asked. BigBarker.com/Ricky is where you go to get your Big Barker therapeutic dog bed with the Process Pup patches. I know you think to yourself that because the bed that you got at the pet store or that you saw an Instagram ad for, it looks plush and looks, fluffy, that's a good bed for your dog, but it's not, because that's good for a pillow, but not for a bed. A bed, you need something supportive. That's what Big Barker set out to do, and that's what they actually did. Big Barker dog beds truly support your dog's joints. As they get older, they age, they get creaky, just like we do. You wouldn't want to sleep on a pillow. You want to sleep on a firm mattress. So does your Big Barker dog bed dog. Get your dog a Big Barker. BigBarker.com/Ricky. Then you send us a picture. We'll throw them in the Process Pup gallery. 10-year warranty. The foam doesn't flatten, or they replace it for free. 1 year at-home trial. They'll give you a full refund if you don't like it, if your dog doesn't like it. And they'll even pay for the shipping. Handmade in the USA. Big Barker dog beds. Right. So the biggest difference between Riley and Rivers, and I do agree that there's some of that attitude that has been left over, is that Rivers just doesn't seem obsessed with winning in the way that Riley was. And I know that's part of the myth making about Riley, but
it is. It really is.
But I think it is true. I think
Sure.
he is it might make him a worse person, right? It might make him a worse person to be around. Yeah, just fucking awful to, and he might be one of those coaches that players say, yeah, he got the most out of me, but I never fucking want to be in the same room with him ever again. Mm-hmm. Doc seems like he wants all of that sort of certainly with the other part that comes with it, and
he also wants people to like him.
Right, and be a dickhead, and like that. We'll play the quote from last night. So poor Austin Krell asked him what part of the loss last night could be attributed to coaching, and Doc, who I forget who he gave shit. Oh, it was Pompey last time. Doc answered it this particular way.
What part of this loss would you attribute to coaching?
I don't know. Would you ask Pop that question? No, you wouldn't. So don't ask me that question. I've earned that.
So the thing that particularly bothers me about it is not that, the question is a little general or whatever, but the idea that coaching could not be a reason that they lost, possibly. The logic tells you that it also couldn't be a reason that they win, and then what the fuck are you even here for? Right? I mean,
it should be what coaching decisions, I don't know if it's a better question, but a more specific question maybe, what coaching decisions could you have done differently during the game that would have prevented, and maybe he answers that differently, I don't know, but it just never looks good after a loss when you don't take some ownership of it. And right. This is Doc's thing, man. His teams for years have blown leads, big leads, all the time. And he's gotten out-coached. And he's gotten out-coached by, in Ty Lue's case, his former assistant. And it's just repeatedly, I don't think this was, I obviously don't think it was all Doc's fault. I think the Sixers were obviously shorthanded and stuff. But there is a recurring theme of this. In the Hawks series, they blew 2 massive leads. And it's just the other team adjusts. Doc keeps doing the same thing that he's been doing. And you even saw it in the Orlando game. Mo Bamba is shooting 1,000% from 3. Obviously, he's not a great shooter. But once he hits the 6th one, you just got to be well, he's on it tonight. Let's get up in his face or something. And didn't do it enough. And part of that is, I'm sure, Embiid and Drummond on defense, but part of that is Doc changing his defense to make that more of a point. And it's just in the game last night, they are shorthanded, but Morris misses both free throws at the end. They can't secure the rebound because rebounding is once again a fatal flaw of this team without Ben. And the clock ticks down, and they don't have Morris is out of bounds, but they don't have a timeout to advance the ball, so they have to go instead of getting the ball at half court where they can dial up a play to just be like one look, a pass, dribble, handoff, whatever. It has to be Maxey going 70 feet in 4 seconds, which he can, but his momentum took him so that he's not, didn't have a good look. But if they had a timeout, like that's a choice. That's a coaching choice that he did allow them to not have a timeout in that moment, which would have allowed them to advance the ball. And it's like, that is a choice because he probably believes that like him saying the right combination of words to them is more important than them being able to advance the ball to half court. He's wrong. He was wrong in that moment. That was a coaching thing. And there's plenty of other things. Like they're just...
Well, and by the way, the Sixers are shorthanded. It's fair to note that the Clippers are without Paul George and Kawhi Leonard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the Clippers are not a good team. I think they're a very well-coached team.
Yeah.
But the personnel on their team is not good. Like I was struck watching the game last night that I talk about how like I would like to see them help less. Every team, really. I would like to see NBA teams that I care about help less, cover their man one-on-one more, switch more on pick and rolls if they can so that they don't get open looks about it. Like, the Clippers made a ton of tough shots last night. In the first quarter especially, they made a bunch of tough shots. They made a bunch in the fourth quarter, and the Sixers missed like a ton of wide open threes and a bunch of layups weirdly. So, like, it's a fluke game. It's one game. But you watch what the Clippers did, like, they just kind of surgically picked them apart in the pick and roll. And they just kept running it and running it and running it. Because there's one time Korkmaz helps too far on the pick and roll. He helps off Kennard. He's in no man's land. He's not quick enough to get back to Kennard to contest the shot. If it was Matisse, he contests the shot. If it's Ben, he contests the shot. But it's Korkmaz. And Kennard gets an open three. Tobias did the same thing, helping off Marcus Morris. Open three. Niang helps off Batum, open three. And then once they stop doing that, it becomes like hitting Zubats as the roller. And it's just like when you have passing and a system that like works and you have shooting around it and guys that are willing to shoot quickly, like it just makes it kind of easy to run offense based on what the defense is giving you. And Reggie Jackson or Eric Bledsoe or Amir Coffey was just like finding the open shooter, and the Sixers defenders are too slow to recover if they're helping on those rollers and stuff. And the Sixers don't have another option to switch consistently. Maybe they'll try it in the playoffs or with Embiid or the guts of the game, whatever. But it just makes them a one-dimensional defensive team because they have so many limited players out there.
Somebody asked in the mailbag, and I'll find the name and I appreciate it, just about team building in general. It is interesting to see a team full of spare parts versus our team full of spare parts. Their team full of spare parts can all move, and our team of spare parts cannot. And you've mentioned this a million times.
A lot. Too many times, probably.
But it is stunning how many players the Sixers have on the roster who are slow, who are just slow laterally, who are just limited in a physical way that you can't even be mad at them because that's who they've always been. And it is when you're watching a team like the Clippers and you're saying these names, like here's a team that was led offensively like last night by Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris. This is not like a team but these are all such different athletes than the Sixers have on the court. And it is stunning, and this is a situation that Morey walked into that was already sort of tough, and he has limited things he can do. However, you have to look at it and say, like, man, we do have a lot of fucking slow people on this team.
Yeah. And some of Morey's decisions have made them slower at this point.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, like, I really like the depth of this team. Like, there's not a player in their rotation, even Drummond, who had like a really very bizarre fourth quarter last night.
Oh yeah. I love the Eurostep layup
made
off the top of the fucking glass.
Strange choices across the board. But Drummond's, for the most part, played pretty well this season. There's no one in this rotation that I'm like, just stop playing them. Even Danny is just like a very helpful defensive player. He's out right now, but like is just a very helpful presence on the court with willingness to shoot, even though his hip is broken and he's old as hell. He rises up a lot on a shot, so he can shoot over people, which you can't say about most of these guys. And you look at the rotation, like I think they're 11 deep, and there's not anyone that I don't think should be in an NBA rotation. But it's just the combination of those guys that like everyone is too slow and kind of has the same weaknesses. And I wonder if, we've talked about this before, but Daryl's quote about, I think he said it to us, was like, don't assume that the team that they start the season with is going to be the team that they go into the playoffs with. You shouldn't assume that, because there's so many times to make changes. The Sixers barely made a trade in Daryl's first year, George Hill, who didn't work out. And then we haven't made one this year. And so it's just like, holding pattern from Ben. But even if they don't trade Ben, I think that this team, Charlie Brown should not be playing rotation minutes on a contender. And he wouldn't be if Danny and Matisse and Shake were there. But the fact that they still have to use him at all is, I like Charlie Brown. I think he's helpful. I think he plays hard. Like, I'm generally positive about him. He should work on his jumper. And obviously he missed like 4 layups last night, weirdly. But like, they need to, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded Shake or a Korkmaz, or maybe Seth if for value, but he's such a huge part of the offense, for just like a more athletic 3-4 type body that can like rebound a little bit and even if they're worse at shooting, just like be a professional basketball player. So there's a lot that this team needs to improve on, even as Embiid continues to just be so fucking good. Just so fucking good.
Well, the cool thing last night has been for me to see him kind of like start off slow and figure it out during a game. And they doubled him so quickly last night.
Yeah, from the weak side, yeah.
And it took him a minute to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But once he figured it out, he had a couple of turnovers last night, but like by and large, the guy had 6 assists. He's bringing the ball up the court. He's 40 points is just fucking wild. Like, it's been wild.
Yeah, it has been. And the jumper looks better than I think it's ever looked as the 3-point shot. Like, I feel more comfortable in his 3-point shot than I've ever felt. Like, I felt more confident, and he looks more confident in it. I think he's up to like 39%. Yeah, I thought Ty Lue did interesting stuff. Like, it's a ballsy decision. You're the Clippers. You're probably gonna fight to make the play-in without Paul, if Paul George is out for the season. You can take swings, but like putting Nick Batum on Embiid and allowing Zubats to just like be a help defender guy and make it hard to make those open passes with his wingspan. That's a really like interesting decision to make as a coach, and I don't think it's one that Doc would make. I just don't think he would like, I think he's so set in his ways and set in like, well, the center covers the center and this is how it has to be. And like when something doesn't work, when something doesn't work that he doesn't like the small ball Ben, Tobias, Matisse lineups last year, it seems like he goes away from it so quick. And like the regular season is time for trying stuff. And it seems like they weren't ready for that in the playoffs last year. They didn't have another option when Dwight was sucking as bad as he was. And you look at other coaches, like Doc's like what, the 10th, 12th, whatever, best coach in the league. He won a championship in 2008. To talk to a reporter like that, yeah, you've had like a bunch of winning seasons in a row, but like this is your teams. Your teams do this, and you have to recognize that. And to just like push back on a reporter and not have any like self-examination or self-criticism, like he's just a guy that doesn't actually take ownership of the mistakes that his teams make and doesn't actually take responsibility for, at least to the media, which he should. Like, he should. Well, and he doesn't do it as much as he should.
By the way, when Greg Popovich does that stuff, he seems like an asshole too. Like, it's just that Greg Popovich is more accomplished than Doc Rivers is. It's not even close. It's
Absolutely.
just like, you're just not the same fucking, you're not brought up in the same circles as, like, you're fucking Brian Billick. Like, you're not Bill Belichick. It's like, it's a different situation. Mike, you have gut health issues, right? In your history.
I love them. I love my gut health issues.
The gut is the gut in your brain. Most important parts of health, really. Gut and the brain. Body Bio understands this. Body Bio is, one of our trusted sponsors. Family owned, family operated from South Jersey. They're deep South Jersey, like Vineland or something. Body Bio makes supplements, but like when I say supplements, I'm not talking about magic. This is not magic. So the one I want to talk about for gut is butyrate. So this is a supplement that your body already makes. Your body already makes butyrate. It helps digestion, basically. Like that bloat that you feel after you eat, like part of that is that you don't have enough. Your body does not make enough butyrate. Your body makes it, doesn't make enough of it. The fact that you're not regular, not enough butyrate. So they make a butyrate supplement. I can guarantee you, of any of the gut supplements that you can take, prebiotics, all that kind of, or probiotics, all that kind of stuff, this butyrate will help more than all of them, and it will help almost instantly. It's a postbiotic. You take it right after you eat, take a couple of pills right after you eat, and it will make a difference. If you take this for a week, let's say, and you don't feel any difference, let me know. I would be stunned if that happens. Go to bodybio.com and use code RTRS20. You get 20% off any purchase of BodyBio. So whether it's butyrate, it's spelled Butyarate, by the way. Whether it is Elite, whether it is Calm, whether it is the vitamin C supplement we've talked about, 20% off, not just your first order, but as long as you want. So go to bodybio.com. Even if you think you don't have gut issues, I bet you do. I bet just give this a try, and I bet you'll feel a difference. Your stomach will feel like sort of like flatter, you'll feel less bloated, and you will be more regular. And that is important too. Gut health, very important. Butyrate, Butyarate, bodybio.com, promo code RTRS20. Do you want to talk about the Daryl interview?
A couple more things on the Clippers
Okay.
game. I did think it was a nice Tobias game. I thought, especially early on, he had 3 steals and a block. That was like the most he's gotten his hands on the ball in defense in a long time. I thought he was relatively decisive on offense. That's like the most you can ask for at this point. He took 2 threes, which is insane, but it's the most you can ask for. Like the bar is now low. Like, be decisive, get to the rim, use your body well inside, get to the line a little bit, which sometimes he does. Sometimes he decides to fade away from everything, but I thought it was a fine Tobias game. Like this is the best you're going to get under my new low expectations for Tobias type of Tobias game.
Would agree. I think it was a fine Tobias game. He would be, as a $16 million a year player, his performance last night would have been totally normal and fine.
There you go. Maxey played 46 minutes. Look,
He's young, bro. Fresh
he's young. He
legs.
can do it. It's fine. But like, gotta get another guy who can be a point guard on this team. I know it could be Shake, but like, again, there's just too many slow players on this team. It'd be nice to have somebody else that could like beat someone off the dribble. Like, imagine that. Imagine if
Your
someone
boy
else
Springer
could
was on the bench last night, wasn't he?
He was on the bench last night.
Yeah.
Should have played. I would have loved to play him. Liberty Ballers had a Jaden Springer G League article, which I haven't read yet, but have tabbed and look forward to diving into because I believe still. But I thought it was a nice Maxey game. It's really, I just believe in the shot, like more and more. Like 3 of 6 from 3. He looks good. Like, he looks confident doing it off the catch, off the dribble. He doesn't like rush it. He just seems like he's using his speed to get that shot. And that combined with a number of like really tough finishes around the rim, around Isaiah Hartenstein's a good shot blocker, or Zubats. It's like he's a tough guard, man. And we've talked about this, but one off season of adding an element of creativity and hesitation and change of pace and little like Chris Paul snaking through the lane type of things, because he's got that mid-range that he's really nice on. He's a good player. He's really, really good. And I think Embiid recognizes that. And that's just like, you put a worthwhile wing that can also do some creating and shoot a little bit and play some defense, and whose name is Jaylen Brown. You're just like, you just feel really good about the future of this team if there's a way to find a guy like that. And I obviously love Maxey. I obviously love everything about the kid. And there's a great article. I think CJ Holmes wrote it for The Athletic about Maxey. He's just awesome. I'm so happy he's here. I really don't want to trade him for anything at all. Even in a world where they get, I'd rather trade like 6 first-round picks over the next decade than trade Maxey in a Ben trade to get the guy. So I love him, and I'm happy he's here. And it was a tough game last night. And I think, he missed that shot at the end. And that was kind of like, maybe it's because I'm reading Chris Herring's book, but that's the kind of thing where I read and I could see that being like, he needs to make mistakes like that. He needs to have the ball in his hand to make mistakes like that, especially in the regular season when he can go like, I felt that feeling. I know what I did wrong. I watched the tape, and like, here's what I'm gonna do next time. And like, I built off that, and it felt like the kind of narrative thing that we want to see from a young guard that's growing, that's getting better. That I put that into that like narrative way in my mind. But yeah, I love him. I think he's just excellent.
I agree with you. Him having the ball in that to miss that rather than some clunky Embiid thing where he fires it off. It's like, let Maxey take that shot. There's fucking 4 seconds, you know. By the way, another quick Embiid thing that I noticed, that his push the ball thing, now it's not just grab and go. Sometimes he sticks in the backcourt and waits whoever got the rebound and asks for the ball so he can push it. Like, that happened twice last night. I think once he got it and once he didn't. I just think it's funny that Embiid, after a defensive rebound, somebody else gets it, is asking for the ball so he can push it up the court. I think it's great.
Yeah. And they should have won that game, obviously.
Yeah.
Should have won that game.
That was
they were up
fucking
24 in the
torture.
third.
Yeah.
Clips went on a 10-0 run. They got, Sixers were loose with the execution. Clippers got to the line. We got back into the, they've tightened their defense a little bit. The Clippers are always a switchable, like they always play that way, even when they have a big out there, they pretty much always switch under Ty Lue. And they got into late clock possessions and slowed down because Maxey was probably tired and they wanted to like ease, he wasn't handling the ball in every single possession. And it's just like, guys that can't beat their man off the dribble. And there's late clock possessions, there's missed shots, there's, forcing stuff. And it just, the lead dwindles and dwindles and dwindles. And then you lose. And it just felt like that shouldn't have been a game they lose. That shouldn't have been a game they lose. But
no,
hopefully we're just, biding time. They're going to hang from like the 4 to the 6 seed for the next couple months, and we'll see what happens in 3 weeks.
So Morey spoke, and I don't think that there was anything revelatory other than, I thought one of the things that was interesting was him basically acknowledging the Kings offer, sort of, and then also sort of acknowledging that they would take that he said that their line has, I think with how great Joel is, our line has moved down a little bit, and acknowledged that he would make a trade to make another trade at this time if the right trade was there. I think him saying that publicly was a sign to the league, I think, on some level.
I thought this whole thing was strange. I just thought it was weird. It was a weird, very open interview to give. I know, like, this whole thing has obviously been weird since June. But, like, obviously everybody knows about this, but, like, I can't remember any other time even when there's a trade request that, like, draws on long, them going and being like, there's definitely a trade to work out with this specific team, and like talking about like we've changed our thing from top 30 to top 40, like as if there's a universal list that like everyone agrees upon. I found it all very odd. And obviously, like, we've heard similar stuff from Morey. Obviously, I've been saying we need to help Embiid while also positioning ourselves to get the guy. And he basically said that because Embiid's that good, he like values it, and to go like, you can help him, but you also don't want to be, fooled into thinking that this team is closer than it is, because as he laid out, like, all the problems that they have in this team, and still saying like, we hope Ben comes back because he's a perfect fit. The perfect partner with Embiid is Ben Simmons, who is already here. I saw somebody make a joke online. It's like, is that tampering? But like, no, he's on the team, so I guess he can talk about him specifically. But it's just he's not, obviously Ben's never going to play here. That's a waste of time to talk about. But I found the interview very odd.
If he was a perfect fit with Joel, he would still be here. I mean, he would be helpful in the Joel world, I guess, on any team in the right situation. But he's certainly not perfect as a point guard. I thought the thing he said that I thought he was full of shit is, I'm looking for the quote, is basically saying that as constructed right now, they have a 5% chance of winning the title. Like, they do not have a 5% chance of winning the title as constructed right now. They just don't. I know 5% is a low number, but they would be the worst backcourt in the history of the NBA to win a title, at least in my lifetime. There's just, like, so many people would have to get injured. I just don't think you could simulate this season 100 times and get 5 Sixers titles. But I agree it's weird. It's also like,
I agree that it's not 5%. I do think because of how good Embiid is and their record when he plays, that it's between like 1 and 2.5%.
Can I offer a blind spot of Morey? That I'm not the first person to offer it, but when we go back to Sam obviously had a blind spot, and he would admit it now, of, hey, like the relationship with the media, like you didn't value it enough. The relationship with agents, like what they thought of you, you did not value it enough. Like these things that you thought were more of a negative than a positive, you may have been wrong, and it may have cost you your opportunity to do this. I think that was a blind spot of his. I have to imagine that, like, if he really believes that Embiid's play gives him a 5% chance to win a title, but he also isn't acknowledging that what Embiid will have to do during the regular season physically to keep them in a position to do that will make it less likely that he can get through 4 straight grinding, grueling playoff series of where he has to be the best player on offense and defense of a team, which is like almost impossible, you know, especially with as little help as he has. And then you look back to Houston, and like I think a lot of what happened to Harden in the playoffs is like you were sort of gaming the system during the regular season. You can't do it during the playoffs. But I also think there's something to like the load that you put on a player. And I just think that as great as Embiid is, it's true, but him doing all of this absolutely makes it harder for him to do it in the playoffs. It's like it just does.
No, I completely agree with that. I think that's a good point. I think Embiid looks as physically dominant on every level as he has ever looked.
Yes, I agree.
Not just he's hitting shots, not just he's getting calls.
Doesn't look creaky at all.
He doesn't look creaky at all. He's bouncy. He like gets, I think in the Robin Lopez in the Orlando game, like knocked him to the ground, and he like bounced. He like pushed him in the back. It was kind of a weird play where he bounced off the stanchion, and he got up immediately, like immediately by himself. Nobody helped him, and it's just like there is obviously he falls sometimes, and he falls like a tree, and that's what he, you know, that's how he's is softer on his knees and feet and stuff, even though it scares us to watch. But like he looks exceptionally good right now, in good shape, healthy, physically healthy. He seems mentally healthy. He just seems like he's totally in control of everything about himself and his body right now. But I think you're right. Like, it's January. There's 3 more months of this. The odds of him tweaking something, anybody tweaking something, are like kind of high. Like, it's probably going to happen at some point. He's probably going to miss a week or two, whatever it is. Hopefully nothing more than that. But like, yeah, we just can't to depend on one guy in an NBA where it is easier to cover a big man than any other position. The way the rules are and double teaming and everything allow for it's harder for a big man to dominate the way Embiid plays in the playoffs because they can just throw bodies at him and they'll call some of it but not all of it. It's just not a guarantee that he's going to hold up. Even as good as he looks now, it's not a guarantee he's going to hold up. So I think 5% is high, but I think that he's right in the sense of like we have potentially the best player in the league right now, who is a two-way player, who can carry a team, who's now had enough playoff experience to be like, I know what it takes. He needs help, 100%. The team needs to make changes for that to get there. I don't think that it's likely that they just like steamroll anybody, but we're in a very, very pivotal 3 weeks because as Bodner wrote it, everybody writes it, but I thought Derek did a great job of writing it in his newsletter about like Embiid. Yes, he is as good as he is, but there is still so much risk in making the wrong trade. Like there really is. And so we're going in and thinking, help him now, but also help him later. And he's just Dow's just got to thread the needle. Like it is a tough needle to thread. Acquiring several Kings players, even if I like them, like seems like a dangerous answer because they're the Kings still. And like if they were good, then even though we talked about it last time, then they'd be good. But I think them around Embiid and some of the other guys on the team would make them better than they are. But it's just like we don't know. Like we don't know how long Embiid's prime is. Nobody's talking about Jokic like his prime is like almost over or like in danger or in peril in any way, just because Embiid has had more injury issues. Although he plays more ground bound and although he is, just seems like in way better shape than he had been earlier in his career. He's bounced back and he's had like a relatively healthy adjacent, 6-year career at this point. So it's just I feel the pressure as someone that is not doing anything. Like I'm just sitting around waiting, which is a different kind of anxiety, but I feel the pressure of like, you owe it to Embiid to really make a run, but also like, he's not 34. This isn't the last dance for Embiid. Like this might be like, Michael didn't win one until he was this age. So like, not saying Embiid's Michael, but he's playing really good. Like he's just really good. We've never seen anything like it. And I do think he's the best player in the league right now. And I wish he didn't have to be to carry this team of slow, soft, lumpy guys to, the 4 seed or the 5 seed. But he has been doing it. And I would love to see him get some help so that, to your point, there can be games where he plays 25 minutes or takes a game off of a back-to-back just to like, because of a little bit of soreness, just to make sure, and they can still like pull it out and not be in such a hole.
Might be nice.
Might be nice.
I think I know he's trying to prepare everyone for a trade not happening.
For sure, rightfully so.
Yeah. What do you think? Last question. What do you think the odds any trade happens with, like the trade, not the trade for the player, but the trade we're waiting on? Does it happen before the deadline? What do you think the chances are? I think it's 50-50?
I think it's a little more than 50-50.
Okay.
Because I just don't, we've talked about this extensively, and it's just really compelling drama to be like, we know that there might be the guy, possibly Harden, this offseason, although Brad Beal still hasn't signed his extension. Who knows? Mm-hmm. This summer to do some sort of sign and trade. But we don't know what that team is going to want if they are presented with the idea of saying like, hey, I'm walking, so you might as well get something for me. So it's just, but Embiid needs help now, and they owe it to the team to try. But then you factor in like the Tobias question, which is like, how much are you sacrificing what you get in a trade so that you have flexibility to get off of Tobias's massive contract? It's just real. And do you want to like in a world where, you've pointed this out a lot, but like in a world where the Sixers, let's say they do have a 5% chance of winning the title as currently constructed. If they make a huge trade that takes Tobias off the table and Ben, who hasn't played, and adds like 3 or 4 new rotation players, mm-hmm. incorporating them that quickly, does that still 5%? The idea is to raise that from 5%, right?
Right.
We don't think it's 5%. But like the idea is to raise it from 5%. So you're saying like, hey, we're going to make a trade in February that by April we'll have enough continuity and they'll know how to play together and they'll figure it out to be like 7 or 8%. So I don't know. And how much do you value that? And do you say like, well, even though we'd love to get off Tobias, we can do that in the offseason, so let's just trade Ben for a couple guys that can help now. But then like, well, is Tobias part of that 5%? Part of that, like if you're raising it? It's just a really odd, interesting question that is more than just like, this guy's good. Because you already have the guy, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. Like Embiid is the guy. He's been the guy for a long time, but like now he's really, really very clearly, top 5 MVP candidate for as long as he's healthy in his prime. And it's just like, we got that guy. So how can you best surround him with enough helpful players to really make a difference? And are you trying to do it now? Are you thinking about his future? Are you trying to like do it like a middle ground? Is a half step weird, a half measure? Like it's just a lot of factors to consider. And how can you try to straddle the line of doing like helpful now, but also helpful for the next 4 years? It's really odd. And I like get on the Warriors for thinking about that for, James Wiseman as like he's going to be part of the next wave of great Warriors basketball. No, he's not. No, he's not. He's not going to be. But like I get the impulse of being like we can do both. Like we can try to make it work for everybody. Where like we're still really good now, and we give ourselves a chance now, but we still in the future we're not mortgaging. But it's like once you have the best player in the league, which Embiid right now is, you got to go for it. You got to go for it, and there's no guarantees for tomorrow. So it's a lot to consider. It's not my decision, but I am stressing out about it and will be for the next 20 days.
I want to let everybody know that our artist Tanner, our t-shirt artist Tanner, is working on a metaverse t-shirt right now, that in reference to our recent metaverse communication with the Sixers' former partner. So I think it's Ben from Kinetic texted me the idea. I sent it right to Tanner. Tanner loves it, so we're working on it. Well, we have, 19 days until the trade deadline, 18 or 19 days. So we're excited to be here with you for it. Another fucking trade deadline that will almost certainly end in pain, as it always does. Maybe they'll get somebody slower. Is it who in the NBA is slower that they can get?
Kyle Anderson, definitely.
Yeah.
Sabonis, your boy, or not Sabonis, Gallinari, your boy.
Yes,
would
he's
definitely
very
be
slow
slower.
Right now. Yep.
There's a handful of fairly clunky men out there just waiting to put on a Sixers jersey and forget how to shoot.
We'll talk to you next time. Are you down with TTP?